what's up, everybody? Welcome into the show. Yet another episode of Crushing Fantasy Football. I am Bryce Lockridge, your host of the show. Guys, today we're going to be talking about how to not be an idiot in fantasy football. We're going to be talking about mistakes to avoid, right? Because I don't want you to be that guy. I don't want you to do these things because they're going to lose you your league. So I'm making sure that you guys avoid these mistakes in 2024 because that's a pivotal part of winning your league. So I'm going to start right here with the first thing on my list, and that is drafting a quarterback in rounds 2 or 3. Now, you see this way too often in your everyday regular redraft leagues. You're not seeing it on Underdog this year like you were last year, but you are seeing it in your regular redraft leagues. You're seeing players reach for quarterbacks in round 3 and even round 2. Now, I am not of the school of thought where I think that quarterbacks aren't valuable, right? That is not what I'm saying. In fact, I think that they're one of the more polarizing positions in fantasy now with these super high upside quarterbacks that have elite passing and rushing upside like Josh Allen. And, Patrick Mahomes even has some rushing upside and obviously super elite passing upside. These dual threat quarterbacks give you so much upside that they can win you leagues. That's not the problem. The problem is you're leaving value on the table, right? Because typically when it comes to round 4, you're still going to have elite quarterbacks available. Patrick Mahomes typically goes in round 4. Jalen Hurts typically goes in round 4. Josh Allen typically goes in round 4 of your everyday redraft leagues. And when it comes down to it, reaching for a quarterback is a poor decision because of this, because you're leaving value on the table. You can be drafting players higher that have extreme value at the running back and wide receiver position, but you're wasting an early pick on a quarterback when you could be waiting till round 4, or you could even be waiting until round 7 and draft somebody like Kyler Murray, right? So even though you see people reaching for Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts in round 2 and 3, don't do it. Don't be that guy. I guarantee you that at least one of those 3 super elite top-tier quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, or Josh Allen, will slip to round 4, and you'll be able to get them in round 4 and not leave value on the table like everybody else is doing. All right, next on my list is I have a list of players that I want you guys to avoid. Do not draft these guys, okay? Puka Nacua, Chris Olave, Nico Collins, DJ Moore, and Malik Neighbors. Now, these are all wide receivers. This is a list of do not draft wide receivers. And I can tell you why for each one of them. Puka Nacua is simply going too early, okay? Cooper Kupp is still probably the number 1 wide receiver in this offense. Keep in mind, he was hurt all of last season, so Puka Nacua kind of stepped in and take over. He is not going to replicate what he did last year. He's not going to return first-round value. Do I think he's going to be good? Yes. Do I think he's going to return first-round value? Not even close. He's a huge bust at his ADP. Chris Olave is simply in a terrible offense. Nico Collins is in a way different situation with a much more crowded wide receiver room. We don't even know if he's the wide receiver 1 on the depth chart. In fact, I don't think he ends up as the best wide receiver on the team for fantasy this year, and he's going ahead of Tank Dell by like 2 rounds. Makes absolutely no sense. DJ Moore, he's in a crowded wide receiver room as well. He's being taken too high. People are throwing way too much draft capital at these receivers that are in crowded wide receiver rooms. I don't like DJ Moore at cost. And Malik Neighbors is simply in a terrible offense. Was one of the biggest jokes in the NFL, and Daniel Jones throwing him the ball. So despite Malik Neighbors' extreme explosiveness and talent, I am avoiding this stud player. Not because he's not a stud, but because he's just in a bad offense. Next on my list is don't draft based on last year's production, right? So, obviously we use last year's data to determine some things in fantasy football, right? Like Tyreek Hill has been a 1,700-yard receiver for the past 2 years in the Dolphins offense. We're going to use that information to draft Tyreek Hill highly this year. There is a little bit of that goes on in fantasy football, but at the same time, keep in mind that it's a completely new season. What happened last year isn't necessarily what's going to happen this year, so you've got to make adjustments based on changes to the offense, changes in situations. Don't just look at a player and be like, hey, they were good last year. I'm going to draft them exactly where they finished. Don't copy and paste like that. It never works out well. I'm not saying don't use some of the information from the past to determine your decisions from the future, but don't just draft solely based on last year. Make sure to be fluid and look at the different and changing situations that these players have and make your adjustments based on that. Next on my list is you need to be making waiver moves every week. The waiver wire is not something that you just only use sometime, in the season 1 or 2 times, right? That's just not something you do. This is something that you need to be doing every week. In fact, in all of my leagues, and I'm in a lot of them, I am making waiver moves every week, whether that be swapping out a defense, streaming a quarterback if I waited on a quarterback, picking up players that are going to go off, picking up players that necessarily haven't gone off yet, but their target share is increasing at their wide receiver position, so you pick them up based on increased target volume. There's always a reason to be making adjustments to your lineup. Your lineup never looks the same at the end of the season as it does on draft day, and that's if you're good, right? That's if you're playing fantasy football the right way. You should be making adjustments. Your lineup at the end of the season should not look like what it looks like when you drafted, unless you just absolutely smashed on every pick, which does happen, but it's extremely rare. 95 to 98% of the time, your offense, your fantasy football team is going to look way different at the end of the year than it does on draft day. So draft day, gosh, I can't talk. Waiver moves every week, every single week, guys. Next and final thing on my list is don't go bully tight end or bully quarterback in your everyday redraft leagues. This is a strategy that a lot of fantasy influencers have been advocating in best ball. And there are reasons for this, like, if you have two elite tight ends and they end up as the tight end 1 and 2, and they're fluctuating every week on who's going off, well, it could provide you an extreme advantage at a given position that typically doesn't score a lot of points, like tight end. Quarterback, if you happen to get the quarterback 1 and 2, when you go bully quarterback, that could give you an insane amount of fantasy points and almost guarantees that you advance really far in underdog tournaments. So this is a viable strategy for best ball for that reason. But at the same time, if you're to come out and do that in your everyday redraft leagues, well, you can only start one tight end and one quarterback. And for the love of God, don't start a tight end at your flex, no matter how good they are. So it's one of those things. It's draft specific. It's format specific. Do not implement bully tight end or bully quarterback in your everyday redraft leagues. All right, guys, make sure to avoid these mistakes. Appreciate it. And I will see you later. Bye. Have a good one.